It was supposed to be a charming royal appearance, a moment of innocence with Britain's youngest prince waving and smiling beside his siblings. But what Prince Louis said in front of stunned onlookers and unsuspecting palace guards turned a ceremonial event into a full-blown royal security incident. Eyewitnesses gasped, officials scrambled, and within the palace walls, centuries-old tensions began to crack. Before we dive deeper into what this moment truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It started as a crisp spring afternoon, the royal family stepping out for a routine public engagement. Designed to ease public curiosity, the event showcased the future of the monarchy through the poised presence of William, Catherine, and their 3 children.
Crowds gathered as the family emerged onto the familiar palace terrace, a sea of waving flags and smiling faces greeting the royal trio. Prince George stood dutifully, Charlotte beamed with her signature grace, and Prince Louis, ever the playful one, bounced on his heels, waving enthusiastically. For a moment, everything unfolded according to the perfectly rehearsed routine the world had come to expect. That moment, however, would not last. Observers closest to the royal path noted that Louis appeared more curious than usual. He tugged slightly away from his aide and approached one of the palace guards stationed at the perimeter, something rare but not entirely out of character for the confident young royal. He leaned in closely, whispering to the guard. The guard, clad in standard ceremonial uniform, leaned down just slightly to hear. What happened next changed the entire tone of the afternoon. Louis, now speaking clearly enough for those within earshot, uttered a statement so unexpected that the guard's face visibly tightened. His posture stiffened, his head turned slightly, and his gaze darted toward the senior aide, watching from just beyond the red carpet. A second guard, flanking the opposite side, began speaking into his communication device. Within moments, the public, still unaware, continued cheering and waving. But behind the scenes, the royal coordination team shifted. Aid movements became brisk, the positioning of the royal detail subtly altered, and the calm choreography began to unravel. Princess Catherine was quick to act. She walked toward her son, gently but firmly placing her hand on his shoulder. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, her composed expression faltered. She spoke softly to Louis, guiding him back into line. Prince William, though further away, glanced toward his wife with a silent nod, confirming something silently agreed upon. Multiple bystanders described a growing tension among the royal aides immediately following the exchange. What had moments ago been a jubilant scene now felt precariously managed. The royal family cut the event short, departing 5 minutes earlier than scheduled. The motorcade, originally set to leave in formal sequence, was adjusted hastily. Within minutes, the Wales family was en route back to the palace, and security presence doubled behind them. But what exactly had Prince Louis said, and why did it send tremors through the ranks of the palace guard? The answer lies in what came next, behind closed doors. When Louis was brought inside after the event, no one expected the innocent child to repeat his words with the same clarity and conviction. But he did. And what he said left his mother frozen, his aides speechless, and the chief of palace security summoning a confidential response team. The Wales family had barely stepped back into the inner palace chambers when the debriefing began. A soft-spoken aide, trained in child communication, gently knelt beside Prince Louis and asked him what he had told the guard. Without hesitation, without confusion, the young prince looked her in the eyes and repeated the words slowly, their significance hanging in the air. The silence that followed was suffocating. The aide glanced up. Catherine, standing only a few feet away, had gone pale. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. Before anyone could ask another question, she excused herself from the room with barely a word. What Louis had said wasn't just disturbing. It echoed a phrase embedded in a long classified royal intelligence document known only to a few. Security personnel, already on high alert from the incident during the public engagement, responded swiftly. Without fanfare or formal declaration, the palace's internal alert level was raised to Tier 31, just one level beneath full lockdown. This was not standard protocol for a child's strange remark. This was something else. Behind the palace walls, operations usually reserved for breach responses and sovereign threat assessments quietly activated. Guard routes were shifted, private communication lines were secured, and senior surveillance analysts were summoned to review every internal log recorded in the last 48 hours. Back in the secure wing, Prince Louis was escorted to a private playroom, unaware of the whirlwind his words had unleashed. Inside the command wing, a troubling realization emerged. The phrase, "They're watching from the walls," had only ever appeared in a 2002 internal briefing regarding a security anomaly during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. An incident never made public, referred to only in fragments and code. The phrase had been categorized as a lexical anomaly observed in royal quarters. How Louis could have known it, or why he had repeated it in that context, was a question no one could answer. Catherine, now alone, sat in a locked chamber within her private quarters. She accessed a secure compartment hidden behind an armchair gifted to her by Queen Elizabeth herself. She retrieved a thin envelope marked with a faded seal and a single, chilling word: Clarion. No one but she and the late Queen had ever spoken of it. She read its contents and then burned them. Minutes later, she returned to the command wing, her voice low, her tone composed, but her decision resolute. "We must monitor the East Wing corridor again." Today, across town, Prince William was attending a military charity event when his secure line rang 3 times. Then silence. The code. He left immediately. Spectators noticed his sudden departure, some filming his urgent exit. By the time his car arrived at the palace, additional guards had already closed off 3 stairwells. A trace scan had begun. Nothing had been confirmed, but instinct alone had mobilized one of the oldest security mechanisms the monarchy still possessed. A speculation exploded inside palace corridors. An older generation of royals began exchanging glances because they'd heard similar words before, decades earlier. Prince Louis's eerie statement wasn't the first of its kind. In fact, a nearly identical phrase had been written, then redacted, from Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's final private letter to the palace archives. The connection had been buried for decades, until now. Buried deep within the Royal Archives' restricted chamber lies a slender bundle wrapped in parchment and sealed with the Queen Mother's personal crest. Few knew of its existence, fewer still were allowed to read its contents. But among these final writings, long dismissed by modern royal advisors as whimsical reflections, was a letter titled simply, "Regarding the Watching Ones." Initially believed to be nothing more than poetic metaphor or the musings of a monarch from another era, it was never reviewed with serious consideration, until now. As the words of a young child echoed within the palace walls, "They're watching from the walls," the resemblance was undeniable. And suddenly, the Queen Mother's words no longer sounded quaint. They sounded prophetic. Within that redacted letter, a single line had been struck through and blacked out in every public copy. But one physical copy, untouched in a locked drawer and reviewed that very night by the senior archivist, retained the full sentence. There are those within our own walls who do not serve the crown, but watch it and wait. The alignment with Prince Louis's phrase was chilling. Ancient fears, once dismissed as ceremonial superstition, were now being reconsidered in tense whispers. The archives team, rattled and unsure of how to proceed, prepared a sealed memorandum addressed directly to the Lord Chamberlain, bypassing the typical bureaucratic ladder. This was no longer a matter of curiosity, it was one of imminent concern. During Queen Elizabeth II's transition, when preparations for succession were underway, aides had quietly reviewed many of her mother's writings. At the time, they had agreed the Queen Mother's tone in certain passages was odd. One aide specifically remembered questioning the reference to observers beyond the veil of service, and was told flatly that the phrase was entirely symbolic. The matter was dropped, but the timing had always been peculiar. Those entries had been written just months before her death, at a time when her mental clarity was supposedly still pristine. Why would a matriarch, so deeply embedded in royal discipline, write of watchers and internal threats?
Years later,
Princess Anne herself had privately asked about the contents of the Queen Mother's final writings. She was told it was an emotional farewell, rooted in allegory and nostalgia. But now, with Louis's exact words reverberating through the palace, even Anne, known for her unshakable realism, was said to have gone quiet. Her face, witnesses claimed, turned to stone upon hearing the echo of the phrase she was once told to forget. For a family that guards its history with clinical precision, this sudden alignment of past and present was more than coincidence. It was a trigger, one that reopened conversations the royal household had not dared to speak aloud for decades. What had once been filed away as historical ephemera now returned as a warning, a shadow from the past creeping through the modern corridors of power. And amid the growing unease, it was Catherine, quiet, composed, but curiously informed, who many began to watch more closely. Because as the whispers from history grew louder, one question was on everyone's lips.
what exactly had Prince Louis seen?
And who would truly understand it? With royal history resurfacing and unease mounting, attention shifted to Catherine, who many believed held the key to decoding what Louis might have been exposed to. Long assumed to be just a symbol of poise, Princess Catherine had long had access to a rarely spoken of Blue Room in Windsor, a small vault housing documents reserved for future queens. Within its velvet-lined drawers, she had recently found diaries once belonging to Queen Victoria, and one entry struck her with chilling familiarity. The Blue Room is not listed in any public blueprint of Windsor Castle. Hidden behind a reinforced panel near the Queen's private study, it is only ever opened by direct heirs to the sovereign, those specifically designated as custodians of legacy. Since her early days as Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine had been granted private access, initially symbolic, a gesture of trust from the late Queen Elizabeth II. But it wasn't until recent months, amidst growing uncertainty around the monarchy's internal direction, that Catherine had begun studying its contents in earnest. One collection stood out among the rest: Queen Victoria's personal diaries, preserved in a stitched leather case marked only with the initials 5th. It was within those yellowing pages that Catherine first encountered a disturbing entry dated 1852. The entry described what Victoria called the whispers, a phrase she used to describe an unsettling moment involving her youngest son at the time. The child had reportedly uttered a sentence he had never heard before, referencing "the ones who speak through the stone," and claiming to see shadows moving through the East Wing at night. Victoria, known for her stoic rationality, documented the incident not as maternal concern, but as a formal event. She described being unsettled to the core and noted that the child had later fallen silent for days. What caught Catherine's attention most, however, was the phrasing, "He is not unlike one that shall come, one who shall speak again what was never taught." The resemblance to Louis's words and his strange calmness afterward was too exact to dismiss. Though she had mentioned parts of these discoveries to William in passing, Catherine had made a deliberate choice not to disclose every detail. She feared sounding paranoid, or worse, superstitious. But as her own son now repeated nearly identical phrases that had once shaken monarchs of the past, the omitted entries suddenly felt vital, especially one line in particular in which Victoria described the child's location during his episode. A corner chamber in the East Wing beneath the chapel's bell. The exact room Louis had been near during the family's recent event. Catherine, meticulous by nature, began to cross-reference Queen Victoria's words with those of the Queen Mother, and it was in the alignment of their fears that she found something truly unnerving. Both women, separated by generations, described the same idea. Innocent children speaking truths they were never taught, echoing warnings hidden within the palace itself. It wasn't the words that disturbed Catherine most, it was the consistency. Different centuries, different monarchs, same phrases, same corridors, same shadows. She could no longer deny it. Louis had seen something, or someone, and whatever it was, it had made its presence known before. The mounting weight of centuries-old whispers, secret fears, and now her own child's cryptic message was no longer a series of coincidences. It was a pattern, a thread that wound through the private thoughts of monarchs, and now pulled at the edge of her own family. And just when it seemed the palace could contain the narrative, an anonymous whistleblower within the guard leaked a classified incident report to a tabloid. All hell broke loose. It hit the tabloids like a nuclear bomb. Prince Louis repeats code from royal security file, palace in panic. The public was gripped, the crown was cornered, and for the first time in over a decade, the royal family had no official response. But behind the scenes, lines were being drawn. The leak landed in the editorial inbox of the Evening Ledger just after midnight, from an anonymous sender, encrypted file, no traceable metadata. The editors, skeptical at first, ran a battery of checks. But when a former palace employee, now turned informant, confirmed the document's phrasing aligned with an internal operation known only as Obsidian Key, the publication pulled the trigger. Within hours, the headline dominated global feeds. The words, "They're watching from the walls," spoken innocently by a child, were now entangled in a web of classified security language that dated back nearly 3 decades. The article included a partially redacted security memo reportedly lifted from an internal debrief, stating that Prince Louis's exact phrasing aligned with pre-established codes used in Scenario Omega briefings between 1997 to 1999. For those who understood royal defense language, the implications were catastrophic. The palace's response? Silence. That silence, deafening and deliberate, only added fuel to the media's blaze. Questions spiraled. How could a child recite code from a restricted royal intelligence file? Why was the palace not denying the content outright? Who had access to such language? And more importantly, why had it re-emerged now? By mid-morning, 2 senior guards stationed at Windsor during the incident were summoned for questioning. One would resign without explanation just days later, sparking even more speculation. His departure, though cloaked in protocol, sent a clear message to those watching closely. Something beneath the surface had cracked.
Members of Parliament began to stir.
A backbench alliance of opposition figures issued a formal inquiry demand, citing potential national security compromise involving the heir's family. Meanwhile, Catherine remained out of public view, and Louis was quietly removed from any scheduled appearances for the foreseeable future. The Wales household was barricading itself, not from the media, but from internal instability. Camilla, incensed by the headlines and suspicious of the leak's origin, allegedly confronted a senior courtier over breakfast, accusing the Wales camp of staging a myth-making campaign to gain public sympathy and deflect scrutiny from recent changes in internal power dynamics. Those close to her said she was furious, feeling increasingly isolated and undermined by what she saw as a growing cult of Catherine within the media. But the public was not so easily swayed by royal squabbles. In online forums, television debates, and international headlines, one debate began to take center stage. Was Prince Louis a victim of palace secrecy? Or was he unknowingly, or not, a child of some prophetic thread woven deep into the monarchy's lineage?
Supporters hailed him
As a symbol of truth surfacing from innocence. Skeptics, however, questioned whether the royal household had been hiding a deeper danger, one stretching back generations. Whatever the truth, one fact was now undeniable. The mystery had outgrown the palace walls. But while the media fixated on security codes and whistleblowers, William was fixated on something far more dangerous: what Louis had seen. And who was in the room when he said it? Prince William returned to Windsor with one goal: to walk through the very corridors Louis had wandered before his statement. What he discovered was more than dust and paintings. It was a room long sealed, air thick with tension, and inside it, a security tape the palace had erased years ago, or thought it had. The car hadn't even cooled before William was striding through Windsor's eastern flank, his face set with a focus aides hadn't seen in months. No greetings, no hesitation, only an unspoken urgency that made even his most senior staff stand straighter.
Accompanied by a trusted royal investigator
And his personal protection officer, William traced the exact route Louis had taken that day. Every hallway, every stairwell, every security blind spot. It was along the servants' corridor, now used only for maintenance, that they found something the reports had missed. A narrow wooden door with faint scratches around the handle. The door led to a steep, hidden stairwell, long since removed from palace blueprints, descending directly into a section of the East Wing that had been locked since a quiet refurbishment nearly 6 years ago. What waited at the bottom was a ceremonial chamber, one once used for rare oaths and internal briefings between sovereigns and their closest advisors. The room, dust-laden and cold, bore no signs of recent entry. But William wasn't there for symbolism. His eyes went to the panel behind the commemorative throne. A panel he remembered once hiding a communications drawer.
with a nod.
The investigator pried it open. Inside, buried beneath layers of forgotten notes and an oxidized royal pin, sat a small black box. A CCTV drive, its casing cracked, but the royal mark LCW4 still visible. The tag confirmed what William had feared. This was part of a deleted surveillance archive, one ordered for destruction after a prior security breach in 2017. It was supposed to be gone. They took the drive immediately to the secure viewing suite. Only 3 people were present when the footage was loaded. The tape began distorted, glitching in and out. But after a few seconds, the picture stabilized, revealing a dimly lit view of the ceremonial chamber. The timestamp was from late 2017. A figure entered the frame. A child, not Louis, not anyone William recognized. The child stood still, facing the wall, then turned abruptly and spoke words that were unintelligible. But William's face, according to the protection officer, turned ghostly.